Hey everybody, welcome to Reflections, the wisdom of Edgar Cayce. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. We are coming to you courtesy of our broadcasting partner, MoreTalk.tv. This week on the show, joining me is Robert Brown. Robert is the author of the book We Are Eternal. Robert is known as the medium's medium for the frequency with which he is consulted by other professionals. He has been in practice for more than 30 years and travels the world conducting workshops and demonstrations. Many prominent people have sought his services, including Princess Diana, and he has helped thousands around the world communicate with their loved ones. Spoken in his own words, the audio CD Meditations for Life includes a compilation of 4 of his own guided meditations. Robert is currently working on a new book on mediumship to be published by ARE's Fourth Dimension Press. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And I was curious if you can tell our listeners how you first got introduced to Edgar Cayce and the ARE.
I was actually obviously working as a medium, and a wonderful lady, Diane Archangel, had organized a weekend with Professor Gary Schwartz also as a guest, and invited me along as the medium to come along and demonstrate mediumship some years ago now. And so I came as her guest, and I believe Diane is still somewhat involved coming down to the ARE. So she had this weekend on, invited me along, and then ever since I've been invited back.
Excellent. And what was your experience going to the ARE like? What did it feel like going there? I know that was probably your first experience being in that community with ARE.
Well, it was quite surprising because many years ago, as a teenager, 17-year-old, I went to a place in London called the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain. The S.A.G.B, as we call it, was amazing premises in Belgrave Square, London, where I actually did quite a lot of my study and training. And it was very reminiscent of going there when I first came to the ARE. Quite a few years intervened, and to find somewhere that had that same kind of community spirit, but also, deep interest where people were really interested in understanding, sharing, learning. These places are not easy to find.
Right. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And before we get too far ahead of ourselves, Robert, I want to take a step back, and if you can tell our listeners a little bit about your background as a medium. How did you come into this? How did you discover your gift? And how did you go through honing your gift to where you are today?
Well, I think like many people, I had innate abilities. I, from a very early age, had some experiences, though, of course, didn't appreciate what they were. And by the time I was a teenager, I really had formed a lot of questions about different beliefs and religions. I kind of come from an interesting background. My parents were Baptist. I have one sister who is Catholic. My brother is Latter-day Saint. Another sister who teaches Hebrew at synagogue, and another one's Church of England. So there I was, the youngest, and headed towards spiritualism. I actually had some friends, and in particular one who became a tutor of mine, Peter Close, who was in development classes, and he recognized that I had some ability similar to him and introduced me to other mediums who were also tutors at Belgrave Square. So by the time I was 16, 17, I was probably one of the youngest at the time. In fact, I remember all those years ago going to some of the classes and trying to fathom out why everyone was so old at 40 or 50 and still just joining circles. But of course, at that time, there weren't so many young people. Now, things are much more open, and I think we have a lot of people realizing that they have abilities and seeking to understand them. So I was at Belgrave Square for quite a few years. I eventually started teaching there when I was about 21. And that's how it developed. I was very, very fortunate with some of the mediums who gave me their time, were very, very unselfish in giving me time and instructions and coaching me. So I was very lucky.
Wonderful. And you mentioned something about how you started this at such a young age, and you looked around you and you didn't see anybody that was your age. I imagine that was something difficult for you. And is it something that really helped to shape who you became as a medium, your unique brand of mediumship? Because I know there's so many gifted young adults and teenagers out there who are going through that same thing where they have this innate gift and they feel that they have this connection and
Well,
they don't know what to do with it. What was that like for you, and what would you tell somebody who's going through that?
As I say, I was fortunate. I'd met Peter Close, who was a friend of the family's, and he was very much trusted by my family because he was a London policeman. His family are quite well known here in England, and he introduced me to spiritualism. Went to various classes, but as I said, was quite young. I think there are now a lot of people. It is difficult still. In fact, with the first class that I went to, the teacher, Mrs. Ivy Northage, who was extremely well-known medium in England, she actually refused to take me. She said at 16 I was far too young, wouldn't even entertain it, until I kind of proved myself to her. But in my very early days, I would see things, but because I didn't understand them, I wasn't afraid of them. I had no fear because I didn't know what they were. And it was during the sort of explanation and the realization of what these things were that the pieces came together. So I think, like a lot of things, when people don't understand something, either goes one of two ways. They either fear it or they have no fear of it. And it was quite natural for me to not fear.
Right.
I think that today there are so many more openings for people, but it's finding the good ones.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, that you need to have a strong filter these days. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you talk a lot about your background in spiritualism, and of course you talked about your family having a background in really every branch of
Yes.
Christianity's churches that you can imagine, it seems like. But I'm curious, in having that upbringing, what have you found resonates with the Cayce material when it comes to your background? What about it? What about the Cayce material do you really take to?
Well, I think Edgar Cayce in himself fascinates a lot of people. I mean,
Right.
many of us will say that he was foremost, obviously, an exceptional person, but he was really, for us, also a fantastic medium because of the different way that he worked. But it also shows you that someone before you has had this potential, and it's a great goal to work towards. Whether there'll be quite another, we've yet to see. I think that when once one person has been here showing what is possible, it gives you all standards to work towards. I think that what I liked about Cayce's work was that it stayed close very much to the healing. For many years, even as a teenager, I would think about healers and mediums, and it's really only been in the past 20 years that it's kind of dawned on me deeper and deeper that it's all about healing. Mediumship is just a branch of healing. Mediumship done well. What has actually happened over time is that people have made mediumship a sort of a separate thing, and it kind of went into branches of divination. It went into precognition, and really, mediumship done well is all about healing. And I think where Cayce has really shined, the whole institution as well, is that it still retains very much that as we discover things and understand things, so we can learn, so we can heal ourselves and one another.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I love some of the quotes that I gathered from your readings. One I gathered was your quote as saying you intend to continue to develop your abilities for as long as it takes for me to be of help to others. And I love this because this absolutely resonates with Cayce. Cayce's thing was he was dedicated all of his life's work to the ideal of being of service to others. So how important has this been to you as you've developed yourself as a medium and, of course, as a healer as well?
Well, I think that's probably some of my, if I could say, best success is when I've been, every day when I work, obviously I don't work every day, but every day when I do work, at the end of my day, I tend to sit and go over, what did I do? What could I have done better? What would have helped more? How did I learn? And I think that it is a continual learning process. And I kind of joke with some of my people that come to retreats and things, and I say, at 17, 18, I really must have been a royal pain in the neck, because as far as I was concerned, I knew everything. And it was only years later I learned to laugh at myself. As much as I may know now, there's so much more to learn. It's like peeling an onion. It's a continual process. I used to emphasize it by sort of saying, I'll continue learning till I cross my arms across my chest. And then Spirit said to me, we don't think you're getting out of anything. When you come here, you'll still be learning. So it is a truly continual process.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's the beauty of kind of this path of enlightenment, is that the beauty of it is that there's always more to learn. Every time you think you've discovered something, it opens up all these branches to new things. That I think that's the excitement of the
I started
journey.
doing some things on subject matter. For example, one of the things that bothered me from a religious point of view, bearing in mind my background, was suicides. And in fact, probably you'll see in some of my writings, I don't even refer to it anymore as committing suicide. Just as a distinction, I say taking themselves over. Now, it's not that I condemn nor condone it, but I wanted to know, from a religious point of view, I'd always been brought up, to understand that it was a sin or whatever. And yet I found through the many people that returned that they always invariably came back with other members of the family who had passed either with illnesses or normal situations. And it took me a long time to put together the thread that runs through, even though each person coming back individual with their own evidence, there was this thread running through that they were with others who had passed just quite normally or naturally. And so it came to me that they weren't in any special place, they weren't in hell, because right from the beginning my question had been, from a religious point of view, I had a hard time believing in any God of love who at that very moment one of his children needed unconditional love would turn around and say, go to hell. So I had a hard time with what some religions were saying about that. So I would take a subject like suicide, and then strangely enough, after thinking on it or wanting to know more about it, for the next 6 or 8 or 9 months, I'd find that nearly all of my sit-ins, people would come for a sit-in and they'd have someone who had taken themselves over. And it was only after doing a load and load of these sit-ins that I saw this common thread, that there was no punishment, except that the people coming through often said they weren't so much sorry for what they did to themselves, but they were extremely sad and or sorry for the pain their actions had caused others who were still here. And when you see that kind of thing, you begin also to see the healing.
And Rob, you have been called the medium's medium. This is due to the fact that many of your colleagues have had sittings with you. And I'm curious, what do you feel this says about you both professionally and personally?
Well, I think I can joke with one of the things. Maybe I've been around long enough that other people say, "Oh, let's see, how he's done it." This I remember came about in one of the Los Angeles papers quite some years ago. I think in, if I'm right, 1993 or 94. James M. Prague came to see me for a sit-in, and then we ended up working several times together in LA, and fairly recently, in the last couple of years, we've worked in Switzerland. And in fact, I can let you know this. Just the other day, since I've been back in England, I've been speaking with James. He's over here next week, and I've invited him to our retreat, which will be in Virginia Beach next June. So that's one thing. Soon after working with James, I think in around about 98, I got a telephone call from another young medium, and he had a sitting with me, and then that was very successful. It was on the telephone. I didn't know him. He very kindly invited me to New York, where, I've been for quite a number of years now, and that was John Edwards. So I think that some of them, as they've come about, have sort of said, who else is doing this, and, been given my name. It's very nice that they trust me and, that they do that. I was really fortunate that when I wrote We Are Eternal, What the Spirits Tell Me About Life After Death, in 2003, I think both John and James endorsed the book and the American copy. In the English version, we have a medium here, Colin Fry, who recently passed to spirit, but he endorsed that. So I think that the fact that so many well-known mediums, or those who became very well-known, endorsed the book, led to that the medium's medium. Most of them had either sit-ins with me or I worked with them.
And as Cayce's gift came to light, he had countless individuals kind of demand that he display his gift as a seer in public demonstrations. Was this something that you had to deal with and something that you still have to deal with?
Not now. I'm so pleased. I wasn't pleased at the time when it happened, but as a teenager, and as I would say young, when people would tell me, oh, you're wonderful, you're great, you're a phenomena, it did come a point where I would believe it. You're very impressionable when you're young and someone telling you you're special. I would believe that. So I'm pleased that kind of happened when it did from this perspective. I learned one of the biggest lessons that all you healers have to learn, and that is when to say no. And I did. One example, I have dear friends in Florida who have a center there, and I was going to do some work there, and I can't remember exactly what happened. I think the flights were delayed from the Bahamas or something, and I had to call them and say, look, I'm not going to make Monday and Tuesday, I'll be there Wednesday. And I was really surprised when they said, okay, because that doesn't normally happen if I ever have to cancel or move anything. People get rather upset because they're booked in advance. So I thought, oh, that's quite astonishing. They took it so well. And maybe I hadn't made it clear, or maybe they hadn't, but when I arrived on the Wednesday, they had moved all the people from Monday and Tuesday and put them on Wednesday and Thursday, and in effect doubled up. So what would have been 5 sit-ins were now 13 on each day. And I remember saying to them, I can't do that. That's impossible. And they said, okay, well, you go and tell which ones are not having their sit-ins. A lot of people have flown in especially. We thought you were just coming late, so we couldn't cancel them. We just moved them. But in effect, it, as I say, doubled people up. Well, of course, it came to it, and I couldn't say to people at that time, no. So I plowed through, and I did it. I hopefully did a good job. But all I know is that after those 2 days, people who were traveling with me didn't even recognize me. They sort of said, where's Robert gone? And I knew then that I had to make a decision to always work the best I can and not just what people want. After all, there are other mediums, I'm sure, much better than me and as good, and so there's always someone else they could go to. And I had to learn to know my limits. And it's always been my thing that I do the utmost I can to work at the very best level I can. And anything over, if it's not that limit, then I don't want to do it. So, I don't let people demand that way now. I kind of set, you have to know your boundaries.
Right.
Well, every time that I have been physically unwell, it has always been just after that I've either stretched something or pushed a little further, or that thing where you often say, I know I shouldn't do this, but go on, I better. And every time I've done that, it's always reflected somewhat on my health. When I come touring to America, for example, different venues, if I push it too much, my throat will go. And some of my friends now have got so used to it, they say, oh, you must be coming to the end of the tour, we can hear it in your voice, And I do think it is difficult, but one of the things we have to realize is that we're not the only one. There are other people. There are people they can see. And plus the fact that, how good are you going to be for people tomorrow if you're exhausting yourself today?
Right. So true. Robert, I want to shift gears a little bit. I'm curious, as a medium over the years, and I'm wondering also, it's kind of a two-part. Has this changed over the years and evolved as far as what are the most common what are the most common things that people come to you for as a medium, and has this changed over your career?
Well, starting out in the spiritualist churches, I was fortunate in that grounding because it is all about evidence. Spiritualists say that a medium's principal job is to attempt or to prove the continuity of life. Full stop. That is their job, to attempt or try and prove the continuity of life. Where it's swung to, not so much with me, but where I've seen it, especially with the media, seems to be more like entertainment. One of the reasons I've turned down quite a few shows, especially where they'll have it at the end of the show for entertainment only. This is my knowledge, my religion, my belief, so it's not entertainment. So I know it's a stickler point, but I won't do the things for that reason on TV. So I do know a lot of people kind of got to mediumship for the, wow, look what I can do. And I've really kind of avoided that. I know people will sometimes seek out mediumship for, who shall I marry? My standard answer to that is, well, don't you know? And, I've had people come and say, oh, could you contact my grandmother and find out if this is the girl that I should marry? And I'm saying, why should your grandmother know better than you?
Yeah.
So I think that what I've done, as far as I'm concerned, the majority of my work has been about helping people understand not only that life continues, but proving to it, there's a lot that can be healed and said when a parent, for example, can realize and know that their child did not cease to exist through the proof that's given. That is so much more rewarding than telling people what they'll be doing next week or what job they're going to get. That's never been my kind of thing.
Right. Absolutely. And in dealing with the work that you have your whole entire life, what are some of the common misconceptions about the afterlife that you run into with your clients? I know it's such a huge topic, and it's also probably one of the most misunderstood ideas and conceptions. Can you tell us about what you found about the afterlife and what, are some misconceptions that you've come across?
I think one of the things is there came to many people seem to have thought that the mere act of dying, of transitioning, whatever you wish to call it, passing, that suddenly those on the other side know everything. And I've often said to people, well, when you go to sleep at night and you sleep and you wake up the next day, do you know everything? No. Maybe things sometimes are a little clearer. Perhaps you have a different way of looking at things, but you don't know everything. And I think sometimes people are looking for spirit communication to get someone else to make decisions and choices for them. And I've always made that very clear. This is information that we can utilize to help us make a decision, but we should not be doing this and relying on spirit communication to dictate or to get directions of what we must do. We must never forget that we do have free will. So I think one of the big things is that people seem to think that everything is totally planned, and that somebody is going to look forward for them and tell them what the plan is. Whereas we know that spirit will sometimes show us the way or give an impression of what they perceive, but it is still up to us utilizing our free will to make our choices and therefore shape our journey.
Absolutely. It's a very comforting thought as well. I want to shift gears a little bit again here, Robin. I want to talk a little bit about your book, We Are Eternal. I'm curious, how did this book come about, and what was the process writing it like for you?
Oh, gosh. I'll tell you the interesting part. People write about, I think James wrote Talking to Heaven in 96, I think it was, something like that. And I was writing this book then, and the book went out only because, as a teenager, I thought, having found this information, that everybody would want to know this. And it was a real eye-opener that until somebody needs to know about it, or until somebody wants to know about life after death, majority of the world couldn't care less. So that was the first thing. But then I wanted to set down what I'd found in the first 30 years of my work. And I thought those who then wanted to see what I'd found could read it in the book. It was quite a long process. It was about 18 months, 2 years, because of the different subjects that's contained. There's suicide, what I found to happen when people pass. So it was quite a process. But then it went to publishers. And I think there were 11 or 14 refusals straight off. And that was because all of them came back. Many of them knew that I had worked with Diana, Princess of Wales. And so they all wanted me to include chapters about our sittings together. Now, first of all, as a spiritualist medium, my agreement with Spirit and with the Church has always been that we never reveal the contents of any sit-in. It's the same as doctors' confidentiality, and I never have, although more in a generic way, I have mentioned, certain subjects, but not specific sittings, not personal details. And I actually refuse to talk about the sittings with Princess Diana, the same as I would for any other person, not because it was just her, but for any other person. So, of course, they didn't get the sensationalism. They refused the book. It was almost like, yes, we'll publish if you do this, and I had to say no each time. My thought on that was, if I ever broke that code, who would trust me again? You see, spiritualism and mediumship, it's kind of interesting. You get one shot, and if someone cheats, if somebody betrays, how can people trust them again? So I said no, and then it was Warner Books, who said, you know what, there's something in this, we want to publish it. So they did, and it went back and forth. I was traveling, so they had to FedEx it back to me for corrections every time, and it was a bit of a process. And kind of interesting, some of the stories of when they were publicizing it. Some of them were great. It started off in Park Avenue in New York, Barnes and Nobles, I think. So and then sometimes I remember once they called me and said, would I go to some university? And it was 5:30 in the morning for some radio show, and I said yes. And I traveled all the way to this university somewhere in California and found the campus, and then I was sent further and further back on this campus. So I found this tiny shed, imagine, at 5:30 in the morning, whereupon they introduced, now we will have the international medium, Robert Brown, who would talk about his book, We Are a Turtle. Exactly. Can you imagine getting up at 4 in the morning, thinking all these things, you're publishing a book, and this whole journey, and then to be told your book is called We Are a Turtle? And I thought, oh my goodness. So it was quite adventurous.
Wow, yeah, sounds like it. Well, it's a wonderful book, so I thank you for writing that. It truly has been a pleasure reading it.
Of the years since that's been written, of the Bahamas retreats, the 13 years of Bahamas retreats, basically that's about all the things I put into practice, what I had learnt in the first 30 years of medium. We had these annual retreats where people who wanted to understand about mediumship, not just those who were mediums or were to become mediums, but those who wanted to understand, parents, people who'd lost loved ones, they want to know how the nuts and bolts, how it works. So we had these annual retreats in the Bahamas, and it's all about what people came there for and what they managed to take away from them. So how some of that knowledge was put into practice and shared. So that's going to be the next 5 chapters on the republication of We Are Eternal.
Excellent. And do you know when we can expect that to be out?
Well, I'm sure ARE might be listening to this, and they'll probably say as soon as he gets us these 5 chapters,
well, we will double check on the date then. Absolutely.
This year.
Robert, it seems over the years you have so many incredible stories. I know you have the confidentiality thing. Is there any amazing stories that maybe you could share? Maybe some from the book. I know you have a lot of great stories in the book, but something maybe that comes to mind that you could share with our listeners that maybe would help them out, or would just be something that you think they would help to hear.
Okay, well, here's one that I've readily and happily to tell, only because she gave me permission, and actually will be one of our speakers next June at the retreat in Virginia Beach, my own retreat that will be at Virginia Beach. This is a lady who came to see me for a sit-in with her husband and a young man. The 3 of them sat in front of me. Obviously, when people come to see me, I have no reason to know who or what is that reason they're there for. And if you had been just looking at them as people, you might think mother, father, and son. Let's look at it that way. As it happened, it wasn't. It was a lady, a partner, and this young man. And I was getting different kind of reactions from each of them, the 3 of them sitting in front of me. So I spoke of a young lady who was communicating, and the lady in front was, very enthusiastic, saying, yes, go on, But her partner, what appeared to be her partner, was kind of very laid back, and he really appeared as if, I'm thinking, well, does he really want to be here? The young man to the other side of her was actually looking at me horrified. I mean, everything I said, he was recoiling, even though the lady in the middle was saying, yes, that was right. So I was getting conflicting feedback. And in my mind, I said to the young lady communicating, I said, you need to give me something that is actually going to prove it's you. Something that all 3 of these people understand. And then a strange thing happened. I looked at the young man sitting in front of me, and I saw, in my mind's eye, and then literally, a dolphin jump over his head. And I just announced, a dolphin's just jumped over your head. And this young man, who had been really sort of a little bit anti towards what was happening, suddenly let out this little screech and fell. And I thought, my goodness, what have I done now? So now let's tie up the whole story. There's 3 people in front of me who were having the sit-in. It was the mother of the young girl. The other gentleman was her partner, her husband. But the young man, I think he was about 23 at the time or something, was the husband of the young girl. And he had said to her, just before she passed with brain cancer, he had said to her, is there anything that I could do for you? Any wish? They knew that it was an uproar. And she said, I'd love a photograph of us with the dolphin jumping over our heads. And that was the last photograph. And that clinched it for him. Now, the lady in question, the reason I mentioned this one, subsequently went on to create a marvelous foundation called Grief Haven that helps people grieving lost ones. And I'm really hoping, we're still signing everything, but that she's coming to speak next June about what sometimes mediums need to know, because it's not just about bringing forth evidence, it's dealing with people and their emotions and what kind of situations some people are in when they visit a medium. So that was marvelous, the way Spirit came up with something that so easily would have been to say, oh, what is this about dolphins? But just to give it as we got it, a dolphin jumped over your head, and that so resonated with him that it proved beyond all doubt for him that it was his wife communicating Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Really, I got chills. That was wonderful. That was just what I was looking for. A nice story like that. Thank you. And Robert, I want to kind of wrap up here. You've mentioned a couple times your lecture that you will be having in Virginia Beach, your presentation next year that you'll be doing on your own. But I want to talk about your upcoming presentation at the conference. This one is actually in November, and you're going to be presenting at the conference entitled Life Beyond Death, Afterlife Communication, Mediumship, and Your Eternal Soul. And of course, as always, that's here at the ARE in Virginia Beach. You're presenting an all-day interactive workshop on Sunday. So Sunday, November 8th is all Robert for our listeners. Can you tell us about what conference attendees can expect from your presentation?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm glad that you're setting this aside to mention that. I'm so looking forward to the people we've got there. Of course, Lisa Williams, wonderful medium. Karen Knows. Everyone that's coming, it's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to that. I've always wanted that my one-day events, when I'm doing them, to make sure that it's interactive. It's enough me standing there. There's a limit to how much people want to listen to me talking, I'm sure. So I like people to be involved. No one's forced to do anything, but I like to give everyone the opportunity to do something. So I like people to come along, obviously with an open mind, but be ready to take part. We will be doing some things like we will start with a meditation, for example. I want to do a guided one that will give people the opportunity to link with either their own guides and helpers, people from Spirit who work with them, or their own loved ones. It's going to be straight in like that, of linking with some of our own loved ones, and then how we perceive from each other, and how I'm going to show them how everyone can pick up some things. There's a limit to what each can do, and of course it takes time, which many people forget. It isn't instantaneous. It takes time to develop and to hone. Many people have abilities, and a lot of them stop at that stage of intuition, but you can learn how to hone it. I don't think it's for everyone, by the way, to become a medium, and I wouldn't wish it on most people. But I do think that many people have an ability that they can develop further than what it is. So I think it will be a great weekend. I know, even though I'm doing the Sunday, I'm attending the whole weekend, and believe me, I'll be at every class, because, again, I'm still learning.
Absolutely. It's wonderful, wonderful philosophy. And I kind of want to wrap up on a question that I like to ask my guests, Robert. As we look at what's going on in the world around us, and also kind of what we see developing, what we see as we kind of project ourselves into the future here, what has you most excited, whether personally or professionally, and what has you most inspired as you look around and think about where we're headed?
Well, I think the fact that there is change, even though some of it sometimes seems rather brutal and radical, sometimes we have to have a clearing of things. But I think more importantly is that people are not just accepting. They are not just accepting either the written word or the spoken word by anyone, but they're finding out for themselves and wanting to understand. And that's around the world. I'm very fortunate that I work in, Germany, Switzerland, India, all over America. Actually, one of the few places where I don't work so much these days is at home in England. Normally, because when I'm home, I'm usually having a rest. But in all these different countries, no barrier with the language, you find the same questions, and people are very, very eager to learn and understand, and becoming more aware of the natural laws. And the truth is very simple. If we misuse and abuse things, this is what we're going to reap, And so it makes it very exciting to realize that people are beginning to think for themselves and look for the answers. That's what's interesting, rather than be led.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I think that's the most exciting. You really do. You see people starting to find their own path, and when they don't know what the answers are, they seek them out themselves, and
And
that's
whose
a
path
beautiful
is
thing to see.
right? The right path is
Yeah.
the one that's right for you, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
Wonderful.
I don't. There's too many people saying this way is the only way. Well, let's go back in Christianity and quote one of the famous sayings in the Bible, and that is, "In my Father's house there are many mansions." There are more than one way to the same goal.
Yeah,
It's the
absolutely.
intent, what people forget. It's your intention for doing things. With a mediumship, if your intention is to help and heal, you know, the one question I ask everyone attending anything, I say, why do you want to develop your ability or your gift? And until now, not so they all know the answer I'm looking for is always because I want to help other people.
Right.
Unfortunately, we do get some people say, well, I thought it would be good to make money, or I thought I'd get well-known. For every well-known medium, there's 100,000 who are not known. For every medium who makes a living at this, there are hundreds of thousands around the world who do it for free or very little. So those are not valid reasons. But the one that shines through is when we're doing it to help other people.
Absolutely.
That is the highest, really, motive.
Couldn't agree more. And Robert, one last question before we wrap up here. For any of our listeners who may be struggling right now, I know this is a tough time for a lot of people. There's a lot of changes, as we talked about. There's a lot of people who are trying to make changes and find answers in their life. What piece of advice would you give somebody who's struggling at this time?
Well, we're all doing that, aren't we? I mean, I've had
Right.
some health issues myself recently, and you think and you say, well, what's that about? I think sometimes when we're right in the middle of something is not always the best time to understand it. Sometimes we have to go through something to see the other side, from the other side, what it was really all about. So I think we spend a lot of time trying to dissect the whys and what for where we're going through it. I like to see things now as they come up. When something like this happens to me, a health issue or something, I say, okay, let's get through it. Whatever it takes, let's get through it and see from the other side what that was about. And usually, I find the answer after. First, deal with the thing. The one thing that I know is when issues, problems, situations come up, if we don't deal with them as we should, or we run away from them, that's our free will. We can do that. But invariably, we have to come back to that same lesson, perhaps in a different form. So whatever test or whatever is thrown up against you or whatever obstacle comes up, deal with it as best you can, go through it, and then try to understand from the other side why. Because I think trying to deal with something when you're in the middle of it just creates more chaos. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, it does.
Yeah.
And it seems to add a lot of stress too in the moment, because it is.
That's one thing I've
I
seen.
think the
A lot of people come to
patience
me
is
and
the key
say,
there. Where if you're
I'm
patient,
at a loss, I
it'll be
don't know which way
revealed
to
to you in
go.
time. Absolutely. Wonderful, Rob. Well, thank you. That was a great piece of advice. And I want to thank you so much for being with us today on the show. It's really been a pleasure listening to you, and I know our listeners have enjoyed it. And your unique view on mediumship and what you do and what you bring this service to the whole world is so appreciated. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And don't miss your chance to spend a day working with a world-renowned medium, as Robert will be a featured presenter at the upcoming ARE conference. This conference in particular is entitled Life Beyond Death, Afterlife Communication, Mediumship, and Your Eternal Soul. This takes place from November 5th through the 8th here at the ARE in Virginia Beach. If you'd like to register for this and other conferences offered by the Association for Research and Enlightenment, you can visit our website at edgarcayce.org/conferences. On behalf of everyone here at the Association for Research and Enlightenment, and of course, Talk.tv, I'm your host, Britton Bickerstaff, reminding you that we are all experiencing growing pains as we navigate our way through such a special time of heightened spiritual growth. Strive to always keep this in mind, and remember to be there for each other with encouragement and support whenever you can. I cannot express in words how grateful I am for all of our listeners reaching out, giving us support and feedback on the show. I truly, truly appreciate it. I hope everyone has a wonderful week, and thank you so much for tuning in to Reflections, the wisdom of Edgar Cayce. Much love.